Sandy. Today we're going to be talking about Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, and I finally got my hands on it. If you haven't heard of Mistborn, it's a fantasy world where some people called allomancers are able to consume metals and then they have powers based off those metals. And all the people in the Mistborn world are under this oppressor called the Lord Ruler. And this story follows a street urchin named Vin who discovers that she has these strange Mistborn powers, and she joins a group of other street urchins to work together to try to take down the Lord Ruler. This may seem like a normal, oh, it's just a rebellion book, but it's not. It's freaking fantastic. I would rate it between a 94% and a 96%. And it would be in like a 4.85, 4.95 stars, but pretty much that just rounds up to 5. This book made me experience so many emotions. Like, I was laughing and I was crying and I was like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? I was really annoyed with this because I don't really enjoy female protagonists, nor do I really like the whole overthrowing the government trope that's going on recently. But this book was none of that. Of course, since it is the beginning of a fantasy series, there's a lot of world building. It's not really action-based for the first, 4 parts out of 5. It only gets really intense and all the plans start unfolding, and you get to see a bunch of just Brandon Sanderson madness throughout the last 100 to 200 pages. But even when he's just building up the world and building up the stories and characters, it's still really interesting for some reason because you don't really want to put it down because they're always doing something that's important to the plot, but at the same time, they're not jumping straight into the action like other books I've read where you're just on the edge of your seat with anticipation the entire time. With this one, it was more like I was very calm reading it until the last 100 to 200 pages, and I could stop reading it whenever I wanted, but at the same time I still wanted to continue reading it because with big books like this, I have a hard time picking a book back up if I've already put it down. So with this one, I constantly wanted to read the book, but I wasn't brimming with anticipation. I just wanted to see what happened next. But also, I think what I really enjoyed, they pretty much made a rebellion from scratch, though not really. And that aspect of it really kind of reminded me of the Seven Realms series, which I freaking love. It was just a group of people who had all these amazing abilities, and they were able to work together to do this really weird stuff, but at the same time, it wasn't like in Divergent or in the Hunger Games, where the rebellion had already been built, and you just added this matriarch to it all. They were forming it from the ground up. And that's another thing I really enjoyed. Vin isn't like a symbol of the rebellion like in the Hunger Games, because that annoyed me a lot. Vin's just a normal Mistborn, and Mistborn are people who can use all of the metals to gain powers, not just one of them. Sure, Mistborn are rare, but other than that, she wasn't really an overpowered chosen one, at least not in this book she is, because she's still learning, but I can see how she's going to be pretty overpowered in future books, but that's because she's been through training and she does have a natural knack for it, and it wasn't really coincidental, the fights and the way that she got better and better. It kind of was in Winter, how everything seemed to be handed to them on a silver platter. Throughout the entire book, there's just a lot of loss and a lot of learning from past mistakes. And I think another thing that I enjoyed were the characters, though I didn't really fall in love with them like I do with other books. They were great characters. A lot of them seemed kind of muddled to me, which is the total opposite to other people, because a lot of people say these characters have a lot of depth, and they do, but honestly, for me, only 3 characters' personalities really stood out from all of the others. And I'm going to talk more about that in the spoilery section. But I think one of the reasons why the personalities didn't really stand out to me that much is because Brandon Sanderson's writing style was kind of bland to me. His storytelling and the whole plot of this entire book was freaking beautiful, but then his writing style, it's nothing like Laini Taylor's or Sabaa Tahir's beautiful literary devices and metaphors everywhere. He just tells it as it is, and you're still able to imagine the scenes and all the fantasy world building, but it's just not as detailed in my opinion. He doesn't go on giant rants about how beautiful that scenery is. I'm glad he doesn't do that, but in other things I wish he would be a little bit more descriptive. And I think his writing style is the thing that made me really believe that a lot of the characters lacked emotional depth to them. They weren't bland. They did have a lot of internal turmoil, and there was a good amount of gray area, but there were just some things that I felt they weren't really emotional. But I think the last 200, 100 pages were just so beautiful. They made the entire book worth it, even though the first part of the book isn't even bad. It's beautiful in its own separate way. I wouldn't say the first part is slow. I like the pacing of it, how it's kind of just building up, and then in the last 100, 200 pages, it's just not constantly one thing happening after another, but it was very action-packed and very emotional for me. That's all I'm going to say for the non-spoilery part. So if you haven't read the book, what are you doing? Bye! But if you have, you might want to stay. First, let's talk about Vin. Like I said in my non-spoiler part, she didn't annoy me at all, which is really new to me because almost all female main characters annoy me. Since she was playing the whole newbie role in it all and she was new to the entire world. Usually the naivety and the confusion of that type of character annoys me, but for Vin, I like the way that she handled situations. She wasn't loud about it. She was confused about stuff, but she wouldn't voice her confusion really. She would try to figure out herself, and she wouldn't complain about what's happening because she's been through worse, and she would try to figure it out on her own, but it wouldn't be annoyingly, oh, I have to be independent. It's just the way that she was kind of raised, and she would definitely ask for help when needed. I like the way that her backstory really fit into the type of person that she was made today and how it worked throughout the plot, because she is a small person, so she's used to hiding, so that really did play into almost everything that she did throughout the book. Like, she was constantly trying to hide herself and make herself seem smaller than everyone else, which actually turned out to be a huge advantage. But she does seem a little overpowered in Mistbornism, and since she did grow up on the street, she did have this whole lack of trust thing, and I was okay with that because it seemed totally normal. And in these situations, and especially in this world, you literally cannot trust anyone. I did get a little annoyed at the Valette side, where she was at the ballroom and just trusting everything. But that battle between her and then the other Mistborn woman, that was the first battle I had seen in this where it was just, wait, what just happened? Oh wow, that was really cool, because before that battle it was really Kelsier burned copper and then it did this. But then that battle, they were all over the roofs and they were constantly throwing new tricks at each other. And speaking about battles, this is the first time I'm saying this, but I think this battle and this entire fight scene and pretty much the entire last 200 pages was the best battle I had ever seen. It's even better than the Battle of New York City or whatever it's called in The Last Olympians. And out of my 5 years since reading that battle, there hasn't been one that's topped it for me other than this one. I was so emotional throughout the entire thing because Kel died. That's not what made me cry though, because I kind of expected it, because in Aragon, Brahm died, and pretty much the older mentor character almost always dies. But what made me cry was how the Ska, who had been so hopeless in the very beginning, were now finally rising up all together. And then the one scene where they turned on the lights, oh my gosh, just imagining that, like a whole city where the lights just turned on in the mist where it's usually dark and hopeless, just filled with hope now because of Kel. And this was his plan the entire time. Like, you could see all of the foreshadowing if you looked back into the pages. That scene where the Ska finally joined together was the scene that had me like, I couldn't do it. And then you have the way that it affected Vin. I think she was rightly affected. She wants to finish what Kel started. She went to the palace and you can see like she's kind of like suddenly changed because of his death. Vin's whole fear of someone leaving her has me so distraught because she's constantly afraid of everyone leaving. And then when she pointed out how Kel had lied, I was dead. It was just plot twist after plot twist after that. Like when she went into the Lord Ruler's castle and she found out what the 11th medal did. First plot twist, she gets saved by the steward. I was like, awesome, man. And then when she goes to the throne room and then Marsh comes out, awesome, man. And then when she finds out that the Lord Ruler is not the hero of ages, that was too awesome, man. Like, I had not seen that coming at all. It had only hit me in the middle of the book that the italicized words were actually the Lord Rulers. That's when I actually started paying attention to the italicized words, because I didn't understand it before. But then I did, and I was like, it all makes sense now. That's not the real person. And then the fact that like people could practice allomancy and fruitomology, something like that. That was what the Lord Ruler was. It all made sense. It wasn't like a totally overpowered being, I guess. Like, he still followed the Mistborn rules. He hadn't completed a prophecy and he was finally given immortality by the gods. He was just happened to be a talisman and a allomancer, which is probably normal back in the day before he actually made talisman like infertile. And let's talk about the magic system. A lot of people are in love with Mistborn's magic system, but I find it okay, which is probably not a good thing, because Brandon Sanderson pretty much made up this entire metal system out of nothing, so I should probably appreciate it a little more, but it just feels like a normal magic system to me, and it wasn't anything like really, oh my gosh, It was mostly the plot and the constant plot twist and how it rose up to be this amazing climax in the end. The battles, they fit the world, but in my opinion, that wasn't my favorite part of the series. They were really just Kelsier burned copper. This happened. And of course, Brandon Sanderson did get really creative with it near the end when Vin started getting used to the whole magic system. And Kel's battle with the Obligator, that was also beautiful. But I've also seen really beautiful battles with just normal magic too. It's nowhere near average, but I've also read great books who have equally great battle scenes and magic systems. And speaking of the Obligators, let's talk about this whole government. It was so well put together. Everything was so strict, and the Lord Ruler controlled it all. And I'm taking European history class right now, and I was constantly reminded of how it seems Europe used to be. Like, it would be controlled by the nobility, and 95% of the people were the poor peasants who were overtaxed and weren't cared for at all. But then, of course, they were under this oppressor. For example, the Palace of Versailles, where the king would gather all his noblemen and give them fake responsibilities so that he could keep a close eye on them, but they really had no real power in government. It's pretty much everything that I imagined old Europe to be. While it was awful, you had to admit that it was a really good government. Like, everything was strict and everything was laid out. And I know that at the end of this book, it's going to be a time of change. I'm already a couple pages into the second book, and they're confused on what to do. And I know it's because it's a time of change, but also I'm kind of confused on what I would do in that situation, because while with the Lord Ruler and the nobility oppressing me, if I was a Ska, at least I kind of had a pattern. Like, I kind of knew what to expect the next day. But now when they're forming a new government, people are confused, and it's gonna be difficult because now you have all these nobility that want to control the world, and you don't have the Lord Ruler enforcers to really enforce the law onto these people anymore, when it's like thousands of poor people who have lost their jobs and the way that they ate, and how are they going to feed their family. They've lost all of that income at the end of this book while they're creating a new government. So I know the second book is going to be going into that. But so while the Lord Ruler's government is really awful, at the same time it makes sense. Like, everyone had their place and they would stay in that place, really. Thank you that they didn't do a freaking democratic system. But let's go back to the characters. Like I said before, there are 3 people's personalities that really stood out to me, and that was Ellen, Kel, and Vin. Vin, of course, because she had this whole quiet thing about her, which I talked about earlier. Let's talk about Ellen first, because Ellen stood out to me, even though I feel like to other people he might not have. But it was because I freaking loved him as a character, and I believe he had the best lines. It might have been because out of a whole team of Ska, he was the only really noble. It was the mixture of his ignorance and his hidden intelligence, and his little, like, tinge of wanting to disobey his father that just pulled me in so well. And I think it's his ignorance that really made him have the best lines for me, because when things were serious, he was very single-minded. He wouldn't pay attention to many problems at once, which is a really big problem, and it shows the ignorance of the noble people. But I think that led to the funniest lines I had read in the entire book, including out of Kel's. People would be talking about kind of serious matters. For example, people would be telling Ellen, there's a Ska rebellion right now, and he would just be wondering, I wonder where Vin is. I hope I didn't hurt her feelings. I mean, I didn't mean it like that. That makes him sound like a lovesick teenager, but you know that's not how he came across at all. It was just his adorable ignorance, but at the same time, he wasn't so ignorant that he was unintelligent and annoying, because he read a lot of books and he wanted to be an important political figure, and he wanted to make the world better. So that's why his ignorance in little matters like this was okay to me, because really when it came to the big important things such as ruling the country, he takes it really seriously and he knows what he's doing, kind of. And now let's talk about Kel. I didn't want him to die, but there's an unconscious thing deep in my soul where I was like, he's gonna die. He's too good to not die. And when he finally died, right at the Lord Ruler's hands, but then he hadn't fought at all, I was like, okay, I kind of saw that coming. But it was when they started elaborating on his death, like how he hadn't even brought the 11th medal when he knew that he was going to face the Lord Ruler. Sure, he might have brought like a shaving or two, but he knew that he was gonna die at the hands of the Lord Ruler. And then the fact that he knew that this is the push that the Ska people really needed. Throughout the entire book, I was on Vin's side, where I didn't completely trust Kel, because it did seem like he was really pushing himself up and trying to make it seem like he wanted to be the ruler. But then when this was all revealed that he had planned to die, and he hadn't actually planned the military battle, but he had planned for the Ska to all uprise all at once. When that was revealed, I was crying. And then the thing that really made me like, oh, I had to put the book down, was the fact that in Kel's goodbye letter, in like the last 2 sentences, he had told the group to keep on smiling, even though that he died. When I talk about these last 100, 200 pages, I'm not talking about like the whole battle with the Lord Ruler, though the fact that Marsh was an obligator, that threw me off course. I was like, what the heck? But it made total sense! And now he has the things in his eye. And now he has all the information about the obligators. But now what is he going to do about it? Now he's just in pain constantly. And he's lost his brother. When you got to see all the pieces of Kel's plan and then how the Ska reacted. Like, they were finally given hope. Like, they were so hopeless. And it was so depressing before this. But then when Kel died, all these Ska finally just rose up. It was so emotional for me because they had finally been given hope. They had finally been given that last push. Death has such a big emotional impact on not only the reader, but then the characters. Though I'm sad Kel died, I'm kind of glad that he did, because that's what really made me rate this book like 5 stars, not just 4.7. I think I've talked about that Kel and Ska rebellion like for the entire time, but that was a really important part for me in this book. So, I think that's all I wanted to say though. So thanks for watching. Bye! Here's a clip of me reading the last like 100 pages of the book. I'm at the final battle right now, and what's going on? There has been plot twist after plot twist. Everything in the story is just coming together so freaking beautifully. I've never read something that just everything was scattered everywhere. The Lord Ruler is not the hero of ages, which is why he's so corrupt. And I was reading the book of the hero of the ages the entire time in the little italicized parts. What? I didn't even notice. But his brother is alive. What was the body then? Why was there so much blood? They killed